Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Nicole Glover in conversation with Leslie Penelope discussing the Undertakers. Excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn more about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is tomorrow, November 23rd, with Tanzila Ahmed and contributors presenting New Moons, Contemporary Writing by North American Muslims. Support our bookstore and our author and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads The Undertakers directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro.fm and Kobo for those who are interested. And tonight's books will come with a signed bookplate, so get them while supplies last. They make great holiday presents. If you'd like to ask a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen and type it in. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. A little more about our presenters. Nicole works as a UX researcher in Virginia. She believes that libraries are magical places and that problems seem smaller with a cup of tea in hand. All of us booksellers very much agree. Her life outside of books includes bicycles, video games, and baking the perfect banana bread. The Conductors was her debut novel. Leslie studied film at Howard University and minored in computer science. This led to a graduate degree in multimedia and a career in website development. She's also an award-winning independent filmmaker and co-founded a literary magazine, and sometimes dreams in HTML, which I heard is a little frightening. But without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Nicole and Leslie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maggie. And I'm so excited to talk to you, Nicole. It's so cool to be here.
Yes, virtually meet and chat and everything.
Right? Yeah. I really, really enjoyed the Undertakers. I really loved the Conductors too. And like the historical fantasy mystery aspect is really cool. I love the relationships. There's so much about it that I love. And I guess give us the overview of what the Undertakers is about.
Yeah. The Undertakers picks up about a couple months after the Conductors. It's new mystery time for our valiant sleuths. Hetty and Benji had been busy remodeling their home into a funeral home. But they also had a case in between the books that they thought they solved. It seems pretty open and shut, but they had some lingering doubts about it, which turns out to be for a good reason, as a new murder turns up throughout their investigations that connects to the old case, and throw in some strange fires, underground tunnels, ciphers, and a bunch of other things. They're off into another rousing mystery.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, one thing I noticed about both books is you take In Medias Res really seriously. You start off in the middle of things. You're kind of dropping readers off in a very fully formed world with these relationships. And so how did you come up with the idea of where to start? Where do you think about starting your books and everything that kind of comes out from there?
I think in some ways I view the opening as a cold open, so to speak, and the Conductors was more of a cold open, as I wanted to give you a taste of what they do, also hint at their past, kind of get all that kind of stuff. And with the Undertakers, I like the idea of them, since I already established the characters of the world, what they do, and I decided let's start them off with in a mystery and process, and slowly go through things, and I like to interconnect things, so we weave all the details in there. And I don't know, it's just kind of fun, and it cuts down to me explaining everything over and over again.
That's cool. Yeah, so it's kind of like a TV show. You have your cold open, and then they go into the mystery. It seems like that's part of the inspiration.
Yeah, it is in a sense. It says, because I was looking. I know when I was starting to write these books, I was interested into getting into film scripts, TV scripts, and whatnot. I guess some of the jargon and the plot beats and stuff stayed in mind, because there's mediums of TV versus book hold these different contentions or conventions, so to speak, that is interesting. So that's something that stayed with me.
So what was it's a really unique idea. You're taking place in Philadelphia in basically post Civil War. It's an alternate history, right? So
Right.
like a lot of alternate histories have like one point where their world diverges from our world. Does your world have that kind of thing where it diverges at some point, or is it just completely, it's always been different?
I think, I guess without diving into, I know the magical element. I don't know actually how far the magical element goes to the world. I know at this point in time that magic is happening. And I think as I'm plotting out, I could maybe it's hard to really, I think it was my thing was I was kind of running parallel with it, with the adding like the elements of magic to what's going on in history. Because I started to say the course, but since it helps that I'm focusing just on just the main characters, not really on history and everything else that's going on. So I'm not really focused on the politics or the social upheavals and change too directly, just focusing on the interior lives of the characters and the mysteries going on and stuff. But I guess as a point of change, I guess it's hard to say. I would even, I guess, argue probably these books themselves act as a point of like a point of like change element. Because I think as I was for a while, a few years ago, I was thinking of like how far in the future I wanted to the present. I want to take these books. And as I was like mapping out like what happens 1900s, 1920s, 40s, and so forth, I guess I started thinking I can just go really wild with this and change up. I don't have to stick so close with history. And so I'm thinking these books themselves act as a point in a historical change. That if I ever took these books to the present, you'll see more of like the alternate history stuff going on.
Oh yeah, because I mean, you have magic layered on top of our world and the characters. I think even though you're not focused on like history and all of those things, you can tell as a reader that there's a lot of research going on, and all of the things that were happening in the 1860s and 70s are affecting the characters, and so it kind of just goes into the world building in a really nice way. But the magic is it's just the people that we knew, but they had magic. And so I guess talk about a little bit about the magic, because it's really interesting. The celestial magic is really, really interesting. And I'm sure you've talked about it before, but I like, as a person who loves magic systems, right?
Yes.
And like, I just like eat them up. I'm really fascinated by your magic system and sort of how you came up with it and the rules. Like, how does it actually work? And how, if I was going to learn it, like, what would I do?
All right. Yeah. It's kind of started with the magic system and figure out things I like: astronomy, astrology. I was like, stars, let's do this. I like the visual aspect of drawing the constellations and like imagining the constellations coming to life. I love the idea of things like swans, like the dogs and the old wolves and everything like that coming to life, but also being the framework for the magic. And so sometimes it'll be a literal sense of like, you have the phoenix star constellation flying around, lighting things up as lyrics, and it gets the fun of it being like this phoenix, is flame. So it's like light and all those other fun things like that. I like the visual, that's the playful visual thing for me. And also it ties thematically with a lot of things, from the history of like the North Star and the stars being important in navigation to just the more like a nature-based kind of magic system that's like innate, it's everywhere around, and it has the contrast other magic systems, like the other big one being sorcery, which is like book learning, strict rules, wands, all this classical sense. And with the celestial magic, it's more like that they kind of learned it, they kind of took these different elements, brought them together. Like another aspect of it is like the potion making and like doing candles, or even other things like that. Even hints that other aspects of like music and words and things like that could be all part of it. And those are because this magic is kind of being created out of just people coming together and being inventive and creative and letting their imagination kind of take them where they want to. I think the big thing for me was that there's magic is only, you could do anything with the magic as long as you you imagine it to do certain things, but there's certain limits. Like there's not you can't do mind reading with this magic. You can't raise the dead, that sort of thing. There's like, it's more you can enact things in the physical world. And it's also particular with this, you have to kind of you have to physically draw this magic. So you have to draw the constellations. Maybe you can draw in the air, maybe you can draw it literally with paint, or in the case for Hetty, like sewing it into her stitches and things like that. I like the idea of the kind of craft based, but like melding those things together and leading to like, enchanted objects which is a fun thing to kind of explore. So if you want to learn how to use celestial magic, just get familiar with constellations and find some craft to think about, and just think about the magic you want to do and go with it.
So this is just a personal question. Like,
Yes.
does Aries, for example, if you're drawing the Aries symbol, does it always do a certain set of things, or anybody could draw Aries and make it do anything that they want to do?
Right.
You know.
For example, for Hetty would use any constellation for anything she wants to. But other people, you have a certain set of spells they would use. Like maybe someone will always use Aries with fire spells. Maybe someone else would use it for making things levitate. But some people have they'll have their pet favorite spells to use. But other people like Hetty is like, I'll use whatever I want, whatever comes to mind, and that's the flexibility that the system allows for.
That's really cool, because I've been doing a lot of research on like Black folk magic, like hoodoo and root work and things like that. And everything is so regional, and it's sort of like, it's like the same thing. There aren't any rules. Everyone's passing it down through their family or their community, and they all do it a little bit differently. And so you can research people, in South Carolina or Virginia or, Mississippi or wherever, and the things that they do are going to be slightly different. And so that just seems like something that's very, innate to folk magic, and that would be that you kind of brought through to your celestial magic. That it's interesting that, because a lot of times you have a lot of rules, and I guess you're counterbalancing it with the sorcery, which we don't see much sorcery in these books, but there's hints at it and what it might be, what it might be doing, which is a lot more rigid. One thing that comes to mind, especially when you're in the past, when you're in slavery and, Reconstruction and post-slavery times, like how does the magic affect the people who are enslaved? Like why doesn't it allow them to just overthrow their enslavers and be free, that kind of thing?
Yeah, those are like all those little rules I had to think about as I was building this stuff. Because once I added magic, is like, if I want the characters to use magic, and I think of the context of history, like I had to have rules like explain why. Like, why wasn't there mass uprising? Why didn't none of this happen? Especially because I made the choice of sticking pretty closely with history. And so I had to introduce certain elements of some of it, just blending like historical things to make reasons. And other bigger thing is just giving everyone in the world magic, basically. They just have there's magic systems around the world. And that kind of explains why these books, the world is similar to ours, but with magic and in slightly different ways.
Yeah. So if everybody has magic, then it can, no one's more powerful than anyone else on that level. So all the other power differentials are still in play. And that makes a lot of sense. With all the historical stuff, like what was your researching process, and how much time and energy did you spend on the research as opposed to just creating new things and having like those touch points on the timeline?
Yeah, with the research I started broad strokes, basically getting a sense of like these different time periods we're looking into. And I went back a bit as well, even though I focused on a slice of this period of time in the Reconstruction era. I had to look at, during Civil War, I'd looked through antebellum time. I even looked like just early as like early 1800s and stuff, just to get a full scope of things so I can know what I'm referring to. And it's giving me a better sense of just the history, because it's funny. I think when I went into these books, I thought I had a good idea of all the certain ththings, and the more research I did, I found like not as well as I thought, or there's certain things that got twisted around, or just weren't exactly what I thought would be, and just discovered things that were just really interesting as did the research. As I guess with anything is, particularly since I had to remind myself I'm working with the fantasy stories too, so I don't have to worry about being too accurate, and knowing when to like pull back and just kind of stop research. Even though I like to joke that research always keeps going, I'm still like researching now, just finding different things. Because I just find randomly on the internet, or just reading throughout the books and whatnot. I eventually you have to stop researching and write the book, and along the way sometimes I might have to go back and check certain dates. Like I know when I touched a few things in the Undertakers, like the crust with the Civil War, like the placements of certain battles and things like that, I went back and just checked to make sure and particularly in the writing area, especially since I've referenced a lot of Civil War stuff in Virginia. And since I'm in Virginia, I got to make sure it's kind of accurate,
Right.
Otherwise, I don't want my history teacher to be like, it's not right, that sort of thing.
Right.
But sometimes like finding things in the research that's like not accurate. Like my big thing was like the push pins being invented like much later than I thought it would be, which meant in the story I couldn't use push pins. So I ended up because I wanted to have a map where then we can map out the mysteries in this Philadelphia. And because push pins didn't exist, I was like, wait, like Hetty has these sewing needles, she has hairpins that eventually get broken. Let's use these on the map. Let's tie threads at the end. And that made a very fun visual thing that ties not her skills, but also another mystery thing. And just kind of just worked really well. So like finding little things like that through research helps plotting along little from the big things to small things in the books.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like how the things that you find that are surprising that maybe mess up your plans, make you be creative in a different way. Because I've gotten into research. Like my first series, Earthsinger Chronicles, I did a lot of actual historical research, even though it's second world fantasy. But I wanted to make sure that it was grounded and approximately, that the things were approximately right, or that I just knew how things worked for the world building, even though I didn't have to worry about specific, dates and places. But I always thought I was always kind of scared of researching, but I found out that I really love it. But it is the same thing where you have to know how much to do, and then you have to stop researching and write. But even when you're writing, you're still researching, you're still checking things out.
Yes.
Like to the point, I just turned in the revision of my next book, which takes place in 1925, and it's going to copy edits now. But I was still like checking things, like, oh wait, I said this. Did I research that and make sure that it's true? Like, can I have this thing then? And like in the real world, I got really caught up in the places and the locations.
Yeah.
Like I made a whole map. And then I would find out, this place didn't actually open until 1927, and my story is in 1925. So can I use it? Who in the world will actually know or care? But I will know, and that will really make me crazy.
It does. It's like, it's little things like that. It's like finding out. That's because I always, when I started these things, figure out when I want to start the book. It's always the key thing. Like I couldn't just randomly put down the year. I gotta know which month, which year. I even remember pulling up newspapers, figuring out what's going on in the world that's major. And if there's nothing major going on, it's a safe month to write things, or a safe month to allude things, because I don't want to say what mention something and there's some major crisis going on, and that if I don't allude to it, it's like, oh, that's not great.
No, that makes sense. I think about that too. And I was wondering, why Philadelphia? Why did you choose to set it there?
One way is a lot of research led me there. Like everything I started looking into reconstruction, and ended up mentioning Philadelphia in some way. And I found a lot of interesting facts about Philadelphia at that time period, from things like having a robust and vibrant Black community at that time period, with all this people who've been there for ages and decades, generations and whatnot. That's fascinating. I mean, it's a little Easter egg, a nod to the Addie Walker from my American Girl series, which I loved as a girl, which was set in Philadelphia as well. And just a lot of things. It's fun, and I just find new stuff about it all the time. With just lots of research, a lot of the interesting details for it, and it's a good setting because I keep able to keep pulling out stuff for different things, in Undertakers, they visit, they go across the river to New Jersey, to Camden and stuff, which has a lot of close ties to Philadelphia from being just across the river and stuff. So it's a lot of fun. A really good fun setting.
And this book has a lot of tunnels. Did you find out real information on real tunnels in Philly, or is that completely made up?
There is a hint. There was a book I got the idea for tunnels because I got really into a subway system, underground trains and everything like that. And I came across one on Philadelphia. And there was a passage talking about the use of tunnels during to help runaways get to freedom. And they'd mentioned there's a strong possibility, but the book couldn't confirm yes or no. And I took it as yes, that totally happened in this book. And there might be, I don't know, the places I mentioned in the book might not actually be real, but who knows? It's several hundred. It's a long time since then. So maybe they just been filled up or whatnot. But there has been evidence of the tunnels being used from like for like a smaller units from buildings, for example. Like I think the book had mentioned like jewelers, for example, have tunnels that kind of hide so people won't see the goods being poured in. Of course, there's stuff like smuggling stuff like from the revolutionary days of that time and little things like that. But I just kind of, as with anything, I just exaggerate certain historical facts and just makes the use of it. And it was a lot of fun building out ideas of these tunnels could be found randomly. And they're also the idea that they've been used and they might pop up later on in other books besides this. But it's just a lot of fun just building it out. 'Cause I like hidden things like that, kind of like appearing out of nowhere, or they just tap a wall and something opens up and something where to explore. Yeah.
Yeah, hidden passageways are always cool. I always wanted like one of those houses, like Webster's house, that had like the hidden passageways and hidden ways to go, up and down and through. And never had a house like that. I probably never will, but you can always dream.
Yes, you can.
So the characters, Hetty and Benji are kind of like superheroes. They're super capable. Like Benji is amazing. That's one of my favorite characters. I just love him so much. And Hetty is awesome too because she's our narrator. Like we always are through her POV, and she's pretty self-aware about her flaws as they are.
Yeah.
But like their relationship is one of the best things. Like in the conductors, and I'm a romance fan, and I wouldn't call it a romance, but I was just so down for their relationship. And so because you have that nice kind of conflict there, it's like a marriage of convenience, which is one of my favorite romance tropes, but they're good friends. And then you kind of draw it full circle so that now in this book, they're like in a real marriage, and I just love everything about it. And having like a married couple protagonist is different too. There's a lot of like unique things that you're doing with this series that you don't see a lot in like historical fantasies or fantasies in general, and especially with Black people and seeing like a positive, Black relationship, married couple. So like talk a little bit about the characters and how you developed Hetty and Benji and the idea for them to sort of start out with this marriage of convenience that was going to change as the books go on.
Right. Yeah, I'm so glad you said you enjoyed them so much. Writing their banter, writing their interactions, no matter what they are, it was always the best part to me to write in these books because they're just kind of fun, dynamic characters. I love just how having people like work together like a battle couple, partners and crying, all these different things together. I think they characters that kind of came up in my imagination from the start. They're always a pair and dynamic duo. And I think that's probably why I stuck with them being married in this married convenience at the beginning, because they're going to get together anyway. And it's fun for me to write them being together, no matter what that fast, without all the little back and forth of it. It gets to the fun stuff, basically. And I really the best parts of the Undertakers is just writing just all this, even like the smaller like moments to break up or fun stuff. It's just doing things like that. I'd like to think of it as perfectly balanced in the sense that Hetty is the doer, she'll want to spring to action. Benji's more thinking person, pragmatic, but he'll still plunge in an adventure with her, just mostly just to keep her out of trouble or just to kind of back her up in a sense. He plays a lot of a backup a lot of times as kind of keeping things together. I think one of the big things I had him do in the opening pages was basically throw up like a magical shield that kind of after she sets like a magical trap in the beginning of the book, and that comes up a couple times. Because that's their dynamic. She'll plunge, she'll do something, he'll be there to back her up, and yeah, it's a lot of fun for me. And also through the interludes allows me to kind of explore pieces of their past together, seeing the friendship, seeing key moments of the partnership where that you can see that dynamic kind of growing throughout everything. So
yeah. No, it works really well.
Yeah.
And even in the first book, I was always like, I'm trying to remember because it was a while since I read Conductors, but do you have, again, romance reader author question?
Yes.
Was it always like Benji liked her, or he was just, because he kind of inserts himself onto the mission. He's like, I'm coming, right? And then the first time that they travel together, and I don't think you explain exactly why he's so determined to do that. Like, did he always have feelings for her, or is it just sort of he had some other reasons, or is that coming up in some other book?
I mean, he'll say he'll point to a particular moment, but Hetty probably suspects they might have been much further back than he was willing to admit, that sort of thing. Or more, it's like it's more like a more revelation in the sense like he might have realized this particular moment, but he always kind of had these certain feelings. And then keep it kind of vague because mostly it's from Hetty's point of view to everything, and it's like it's. I also strongly imply that Hetty's had the probably longer, deeper feelings than she's willing to admit as well. That she just kind of buries them because she's always like mission first, rescue my sister, take care of help my friends, solve this mystery, all these other things. Then it takes her a while to kind of admit the things that she wants a lot. And that's kind of the shift that I kind of moved between the two books, whereas like she's moving from the first book, she's more like mission first, and the second book is more like thinking more what she wants in a sense, the broader scale of things. So that kind of ties in with all the romantic arc in a sense.
Yeah. So cool. I love them so much. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you have a question, to use the Ask a Question link, and we will answer your questions. So with the other characters, the community, like the other really unique, interesting, cool thing is the found family and all of the friendships. I mean, there's a pretty big cast of characters that you meet in the conductors and you come back to in the Undertakers. And another thing, like I think about fantasy books, and a lot of times you gather people together on a quest in like a traditional fantasy, but this is set in one place, and there's it's like a domestic, friendship. We're going over to their houses, we're doing plays in their houses, everyone's coming up. It's just so cool. And another thing that you don't see in this way very often. So you've got other couples, you've got single people, you've got just all of these people who make up their community. So why was that important to you to have in these books?
I think from as a community aspect, it was a big thing. It's like, I guess it felt like a big thing is through the research, through knowing just the Black community itself. There's all these people coming in. There's there's relatives that you call aunts and uncle that really aren't really by blood, that they're aunts and uncles anyway. And like I like the idea of just Hetty being a person who gathers people around her that she people she likes to keep in her lives, and that's a strong aspect that's one of the elements of the character. They like to keep people around them. And the other aspect of it for as the writers is for me is to have different foils to play around with different people, because you have like a more like of characters are more like they're kind of fussy, they're more complaining, like Oliver complains about all the dead bodies and building, because even though he's an embalmer, he'll help him out, but he'll complain all the way. Then you have other characters like Hetty's close friends like Penelope and Darlene, who will be like they'll have like give advice, suggestions, or go along with some of her wild and zany mystery plots sort of thing, and act as some people give advice and consciousness like that. So all the different kind of relationships were a lot of fun for me to show different sides of the characters, but also bring in certain mystery elements too. Because all their friends get involved with the mystery point at different points of the things, whether it's like we're certain like small episodes within the mystery, because they bring certain skill sets. Because like Penelope, for example, is a potion maker, her herbologist, alchemist. So she has that skill set that Hetty doesn't have. So she'll bring in her certain skills. And there's other characters like Thomas. He's there kind of support. He's the cook. He'll make sure they're fed. He makes sure there's food in the house. He'll be sure that they're taking care of themselves, basically. So he's there as a kind of support system and whatnot. So all these different characters bring certain things that Hetty and Benji don't necessarily have themselves, and also keeps them attached to the community, because even though they do these mysteries and they have part of funeral home, and having their friends gives them a closer connection. Because I think at one point when I was writing Conductors, I was thinking like, why are they staying in Philadelphia? They could, they've been traveling all these years. Like, why are they staying in this one place? And the answer came to me was their friends. Their friends that became a family, that came to a close knit, that they want to keep them in their lives. And yeah.
And one of the other really cool things is sometimes that you do really well is showing the relationships. Because sometimes I feel like, are they frenemies? A lot of these people have these conflicts. Yes. They love each other, but they're also annoyed with each other a lot of the time. Yeah. And they get on each other's nerves. And some people are just choleric and grumpy, and you kind of accept them for the way they are, but they're going to be there for you anyway. So you're showing just this gamut of personalities and relationships that is like so true to life. Like, that's my friend, but I can't stand her half the time.
Yes, they are it's like idea like Hetty has this like combative relationship with one of her friends' husband, and like she basically says like, I don't really like you, but you're married to my best friend. And so I'll
Yeah.
tolerate you, keep you in my life. And you're not, sometimes she'll admit sometimes he's not so bad.
So we do have a question from Pam. If I haven't read The Conductors, would I be lost by reading The Undertakers first? They both sound great. They both are great. What do you, are these standalones or what?
Yeah, it's a pretty much self-contained mystery. You can basically jump in. I'll let you know the most key important things. There might be some light spoilers for Conductors, but otherwise you can kind of start The Undertakers and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you could start either place. Yeah, that works really well. So with having all these characters, like how do you, like mechanically, do you have a story Bible or you keep them straight, or how do you keep their personalities and backstories and histories? Because you do go back and forth in time in both books. And there's like 10 friends or something like that where you have to keep track of. So how do you do that mechanically?
Well, I don't have a story Bible. I have a Word document where they're all listed, and I'll have some key information that I basically kind of refer to. And yeah, it's for the main friends, there's the list basically. Like always when I write a book, I'll list all the main cast. Basically, I have Hetty and Benji, I have the friends. Then I'll bring in the supporting characters that play minor roles, and of course like the murder victim, the murder suspects, and all those different things like that. And I think when I'm plotting out the books, I actually end up doing like a character web thing at the end. But I'm trying to make sure I have, especially with the new characters, I want to make sure that they aren't like too excessive, because I find I have certain characters I might invent while I'm drafting for fill in certain plot points of the book. But sometimes I end up merging them together. That happens a couple of times with the Conductors, and even happened in the Undertakers a little bit, where I just end up merging certain characters or taking certain attributes of the characters to make them look stronger and whatnot. But I think I do a very good job with the supporting, with their friends, the supporting cast that way, because I try to give them people distinctive personalities that it helps for me where I can can remember quickly. And my other trick is making distinctive names and making sure I'm not having people start with too many similar sounding names or with letters and whatnot. It's a thing. It's a little quirk I have with writing and stuff. So I think when I pick out names for characters, I got to make sure I can spell them right all the time when I'm drafting, because that's how I know how well suited a name is. Because if I keep misspelling, I need to change it.
That's a good point, though.
Yeah.
That's actually something that's smart, because I do have characters whose names I misspell all the time. I'm like, maybe I should have changed that. And in the final pass, you're like, all right, how do I spell this? How am I going to do that? That's real. So, okay, process. I love talking with authors about process. These are mysteries. You mentioned plotting. So do you plot them out ahead of time?
Yeah, I'd basically figure out who gets murdered, how it happened, why, who's the murderer, and get listing on the potential suspects that would kind of be thrown in as red herrings. And kind of from there, then I work kind of backwards. I kind of figure out just certain elements that bring it into certain things. And I really don't start plotting out the book itself until about the first third or so I'm into the draft. And I'm mostly setting things up. I'm mostly setting up like the initial scenes, the initial things that draws them into the mystery and everything like that. And once I hit the wall of figuring out where I need to go, I start laying out more of like, here's the parts of the mystery. Here's I want to have a high point of within the middle of the novel, here's certain things are going to happen. Then I just kind of write until I run out of scenes I want to write, because I think it's basically how I draft. Until I stop coming up with new scenes for this book, that's when I know the draft is over and it's time to revise. But I love spending all my time in revision. I try to get through drafting as quickly as possible, because it's just me getting words on the page. But because I think of drafting as a large scale brainstorming. It's like an active brainstorming session to get that first draft out. Everything else, the revision part, is just me figuring out of what the story is, fine tuning, rearranging. I like to call it sometimes taking the acts of the book where I chop it up. And literally sometimes I would take ladder scenes, moving to the front and backwards and all those other things, and just letting my mind kind of make the connections. And it's really funny, when I'm messing around with certain passages, I'll pull out something random from a scene, or even like stuff that gets cut from like other stuff. I think for like the Undertakers, like actually a couple scenes that ended up from that were cut from the conductors, or even cut from like an earlier other drafts of books that weren't related directly related to this, that I revamped and pulled into this book. And it's kind of fun to seeing how all the stuff I worked on before kind of works perfectly with the scenes I had in mind. So the couple happened mostly with the interludes this time around.
Okay, that's really cool. That's really similar to my process.
Yes.
Like first draft, just get it out as fast as possible. No editing. I don't even actually read it. I just try to get to the end, and then the second draft is revision is where the magic happens, because that's what I actually like. I hate first drafts. I can't stand them. They feel bad. They don't feel like real writing. It's like, what is this crap?
You're putting out words and like spitting out stuff. It's like it's horrible. Sometimes just pushing out, because since I mostly write at night because I have the day job and stuff. So I'm like just putting out, sometimes I get obsessed with meeting that word count, and sometimes it's not a pretty word count. Because I'm really not at the cleanest typist a lot of times, but as long as it makes sense, in the end, I'm gonna read it back.
Yeah. No, my first drafts are just all red squiggles.
Yeah.
Like no other human being could read them. They're so terrible. There's so many typos. But what I do now is I do the first draft, and then I'll immediately at least clean up the typos so that I get rid of the red squiggles, but I'm not editing anything, just so I can actually read it and remember, because sometimes it's so bad. Like, what is that sentence? I don't know what those words are.
It's funny. Like there's even one weird writing quirk is that I have like these words transposed, like these, like I have like the opposite supposed to be, or something like that. It's like a weird thing. Like I guess it's because it's the mental, because it's just going straight from my mind to the computer. So it's like it's weird, but it makes sense when I read it back a lot of the times.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. I like I said, I also just love being revision part and just kind of going over things, and when getting to the point of like it gets really to the final version where I feel like I need to stop messing with it. I always find when I get angsty of wanting to move on to a different project. That's when I know I need the revision part. For this pass of revision is done for now. Can you let it simmer before I come back to it and figure out when to let it go, basically when to send off to my agent or someone else to read it. And that's always the really tricky part too, because I think it's, especially when it's like I think especially now, since I'm more like in the working writer phase, instead of this being more casual as I have in the past, is more like figuring out when I need to let go so I can work on other stuff. And because it's like, because in the past I never had to contracts to work towards and everything like that. So on time I could sit with a book for as long as I want to, but now I have to figure out when I need to just let it go and to move on to something else or switch things around and everything like that. I think also the problem is I get since I get all these different ideas I want to work on at the same time. I think the other day I got another idea for certain things, and I guess I'm not doing nano this year technically, because I'm revising a project I wrote earlier this year. And because I was going to draft something new, but I got feedback for a recent project, and I was like, I need to get that done first before I just do this other draft. And so it's like it's all this balance of things, but I guess being able to switch, knowing when to switch, is always kind of the key, I guess.
Yeah, like working under contract and under deadline is just such a completely different thing that I don't think new writers understand, and maybe it's better if they don't, because it might scare them. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, because that was the thing. Because with the Undertakers, I wrote that it was the first thing I ever wrote towards contract and deadlines and everything like that. And that was like wild without taking in like entire last year into account.
Right. Yeah. Like writing and releasing during the pandemic is also a whole nother emotional thing.
Yeah, because both my books were like I wrote Conductors was finished before all this stuff started, but I was revised. I got my edits back, March 2020 for the Conductors, and I was figuring out when we did the Undertakers and all that same time. So it's like, it kept me busy. So that's the one thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
So got another question. Are we handwriting our drafts, or do we use index cards and play around with that? Do you do any handwriting?
I always have a notebook at my side. I'll draft out scenes, particularly when I get stuck. when I get, particularly when I get stuck with like drafting out a scene, like, and then I always go back, I'll go pick up my notebook and write out some stuff for a bit so I figure out things that are going on. I always have like notes of certain things. Sometimes it'll be like a note of like this thing this element I need to make sure it needs to be in the book. Particularly especially when I'm revising too, when I'm doing those revision paths, I want to make sure like certain things I had foreshadowed or dropped or mentioned that needs to be pulled back into later. So I'll have a notebook on its side. Yeah, but other than that, no index cards, nothing fancy, no tools. I just have, I guess I'm unorganized in the sense I just have notebooks. I have my Word document where I have all these notes and everything like that. But that's the extent of things. I guess I find all these tools like Scrivener and all these fancy writing programs like that get in my way because I got to figure out how these things work. And it takes up too much time. So I just need a Word document and I kind of go with it.
Yeah, I can't write by hand. My hand would just fall off. Like I do have notebooks. Kind of, I do a little bit of everything. So
yes,
I keep notes in notebooks. I have these blank. They have to be blank page notebooks.
Oh,
and
really?
I don't like lines because I'm drawing things. I'm doing mind maps. I'm scribbling on the side. And then I also have text files. So sometimes because I type faster than I write. So I don't know how I decide, but I keep a running text file and a notebook, and some notes go here and some notes go there, and then I can't find anything, which is a problem. But it just works out that way. And I do use note cards sometimes for some projects. I use sticky notes sometimes for some projects. I kind of just I do anything it takes, and I try a little bit of everything. And I love Scrivener. It's funny to call it like a fancy writing program. Scrivener is I guess it is a fancy writing program. It's like Word on steroids. Yes. But when you're moving scenes around, which I do also, it's so much easier to do it when you can just drag and drop like a little piece of text. I mean, not even like a block, and see it in different ways. I couldn't imagine doing this without Scrivener. But yeah, every book requires something different, like a slightly different process, even though it's kind of the same process. And as you write more, you're refining that process and getting stuck and trying something different.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I think it's all this writing stuff I've been doing. It's made me a better writer, figuring out what works for me, basically, and what works better with my style or things that all this other thing.
That's the most important thing. Yeah. So I'm super curious. You mentioned that you had pulled some stuff from other projects, like previous books, into this. Can you talk a little bit about what those other projects were?
Well, yeah, some of them were just like early, like just first drafts of things, like most of the kind of interludes, more like a certain themes. Like there's an interlude early in the book where it's like a flashback where you see Hetty's she's making a dress for like a client and she's undercover trying to get someone help another runaway, and that was actually from a subplot from the conductors. I had her originally. She was going to be making a dress for this a wealthy white heiress, this was a whole little subplot that mostly got her to interact with one of the maids in the household for another little kind of plot line with that. But I ended up cutting it mostly because Hetty quits her dressmaking job early in the book, and so that was no longer needed for that. And so, but I like the dynamic of her as Hetty just being like, who wants these bows on this dress? And I was like, and then so I was thinking of interludes for this Undertaker. I was like, I remember that scene and thought I could easily work that in with whatever the new plot line, and that so it was like a perfect fit, other than the changing certain things and making it more clear that this is a younger version of Hetty reacting, as compared to more to where it was in the original draft and stuff like that. There was another scene where they're on the islands, the sea islands. There's this interlude where it's the sea islands. I read a lot of research about the Port Royal experiment, where this time that all those islands out in South Carolina and Georgia were liberated because all the white planters kind of fled because of the Civil War, and the people there kind of reclaimed the islands for their own usage and stuff like that. And I had an idea for that scene. And there's also a scene where Hetty gets in a little spot of trouble in there, and that particular scene, that moment she got in trouble, was actually from a draft from another book of that was it was this weird hybrid novella thing I wrote a few years ago that was like a 1940s but in space, because they had flying cars and everything like that. It's weird, and but it was a weird novella and I really wasn't anywhere. But I took that particular scene of that spot of trouble and just reworked it for that to make that work for the interlude. And so like there's like little things like that. It's always kind of fun. Just taking the feeling of the scene and just making it meshing and making all the words work. And it just mostly shows my mind just thinks of certain themes and certain character types. So
1940s in space, resurrect that. I'm like so intrigued.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was super weird. It's like I think I was experimenting with it was kind of a definite like secondary world, because like I remember the world the main character goes to had like salt rainstorms and like different weather patterns and stuff like that. Because one thing I've been thinking about the fantasy is that we kind of keep a lot of Earth-based worlds. We keep, we have the regular snowstorms, windstorms, nothing out of the ordinary. And I think like, why don't we have like salt storms or like crazy like colors in the sky? Like we don't really experiment too much. We don't really make our worlds fantastical. We make them like he's still Earth-like. So I guess whenever they get adapted by Amazon or Netflix, we can make it. We don't have to go crazy over budget or something.
Cheaper.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, that was it was mostly a lot of experimental things with that thing. And then I think I actually pulled a lot of. I called a lot of stuff from that book from other projects actually. It's mostly because of just little things here and there, but.
Cool. All right, so you mentioned it. I know that you've optioned for film. Now, authors have no. That's super exciting, and that's awesome.
Yes.
Authors have no like bearing on the casting or anything. But do you have a dream casting? Do you think about like real actors when you're writing at all?
No, I think when it comes to adaptation or just movie and TV in general, I always like casting unknown actors for these things, because I think there's a lot of particularly in the Black community, there's a lot of well-known actors that we always kind of pull from that same pool, no matter if the right age, the right type, mostly because we love these actors and we've seen them in a lot of these projects we enjoyed, so we want to keep them. So these are familiar, especially when these competitions on the internet. But I'm always like, let's cast someone you never heard of that could surprise you and embody a character. And you don't you're not really thinking of the actor, you just get to enjoy the character. So I guess that's my answer. But it's if I do, so if someone well known does end up as cast of these characters in the adaptation, I'm not going to complain. But
I don't ever have a dream cast either. Like people ask that question, I'm like, I write. I don't actually see their faces when I write, I have like their essence. They're sort of like a blob of essence and emotions when I'm writing. And a lot of people do cast and they're like, this is Idris Elba. And that's what I'm writing about. And I'm like, okay. Occasionally I do, like if there is like my new book, it's coming out next year. There are certain characters or certain people for one or two, and the rest of them are kind of the blobs, but there's like, that person I'm actually just pulling, straight from, and they're my inspiration. But that's actually really rare for me, at least. Are you involved at all? Like I know more authors are writing or getting in writers' rooms for TV shows or adapting their own work. Are you going to be involved with the film at all?
No, it's basically I might get a ticket for the opening night. Something happens, but no, I think I had mentioned initial like talks about maybe screenwriting. Being part of it, but they kind of gently told me no, which is also I'm a small fish writer, I'm new and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, I understand. As long as they're good hands, basically. I think at most I heard the other day they're just like they're in the initial pitching point and stuff. So it's hopeful. I'll be probably as surprised as much as anyone. I might get a heads up before any kind of news gets out, but it's still that it happened. That's the things happening with it. It's like astonishing to me. And
it's amazing, and that's awesome. So I was like so excited to see that, because we need more fantasy, more Black fantasy, and this genre. I think there's going to be more because of like Lovecraft, and you're seeing, and even Watchmen and all of that. We're proving that people will watch it and will support. So that's cool. It's really nice. So, okay, you're no spoilers, but it seems like there's going to be a third Hetty and Benji mystery based on the way that this one wraps up. Is that what you're working on? And what else, if besides that, or in addition to that, are you working on next?
I mean, I can't really say anything about anything officially at the moment, but I have a couple of good ideas for their adventures because they have a lot of mysteries, to solve, a lot of interest in. So I can't say anything at the moment. And between like working on that and just thinking of other projects as well, because I come with all these like different ideas on, especially when I'm busy writing and things I want to work on. Part of this year I spent with working on the projects I had put on the back burner as I worked to get these 2 books out. And so it's a lot of fun stuff. Like I think I had some ideas for like kind of a steampunk alternate history thing. I think I finished up something earlier this year that was like kind of taking the history into like a secondary world, but like not history. Because I think I work a lot of historical fantasy and stuff. But this particular book, I was like, I don't want to work with history anymore. I want to have like fun with the secondary world, but I still want to have the historical vibes. So it was like, it's kind of I just changed names around and just made it the fake world. And it was a lot of fun. It was actually really a nice like kind of a pressure release because to do all this historical fantasy stuff, I had to read all the history and stuff like that. And it gets this, I know it's heavy at some certain points and like this and just thinking about stuff. I think it's even like my fun alternate history thing I worked on earlier this year. Oh my gosh, they used the history I had to research to find a point to do that twist of like of historical moment. It was just so overwhelming. This was my fun like romantic comedy with like steampunk elements thing, and like I'm looking at all this heavy stuff because I definitely wanted to make it clear it was more of an alternate history because even though there isn't fantastical elements in this particular story, but it was like it's the alternate history thing. If I got to make sure you could throw that in there, and it's like this is the research and stuff for this. So this other project I finished up in October was like this is my fun secondary world. It's vibes of the history. I don't know. I guess I find myself drawn to like the history stuff because there are a lot of interesting elements in there, like to pull into stuff like that.
I do need a break. From
you do from stuff.
But like especially researching anything Black history is going to be heavy, and I'm going through that now, and I've been going through that the past year, where it's like, okay, I got to get through this to find the story, and I like doing the research, but sometimes, it does bring you down because kind of any time, well, now included, but anytime before now, not always so great. But I think you did a great job of focusing on people who are, they are free now, they were enslaved, they're freeing people, and sort of not focusing on the negative, but knowing that it's there. That's like the groundwork. Like that's that you can't escape it. And you don't want to escape it, but that's not what the story is. The story is not suffering and Black
that was my thing. Like I got really worried, I guess, when I was like finishing up the conductors, it's like all this stuff. I see all the stuff on the internet, like Black pain story, Black trauma story. I'm freaking out. Am I writing a trauma story? Did I tend to write this trauma? Didn't mean to write this trauma story, and all these thoughts that got really in my head about it. Even though I know I didn't do that on purpose. I focused on other things, like just like it's those things you just worry about because people interpret things that you can't control once you set out this book out to the world. And so I guess I'm trying to represent myself, the characters and the world of the book itself as best as possible, and hope people get the right things about it. But
no, you did not write a Black pain story, definitely. And I appreciate that as well too. We had another question. Was there anything that you wanted in the book the editor did not want in it? How's your editorial experience been?
It actually wasn't too bad. I got a lot of freedom with plot-wise for certain things. So it was more like a little, like, I got more of like the grammar edits for certain things. So it wasn't anything too plot-based that was bad. I actually had like the ending of the conductors improved by like a note of like cutting out the scene at the end. And I think it originally extended a little bit further. I always like the idea of like, adventure, new mystery on the way kind of feel. And that was how the conductor was originally going to end. But I got a note from the editor as being like, why don't you cut the scene a little bit earlier? And it just works as a good ending note for that. Okay. But I got another note in the Undertakers was basically said like, maybe you shouldn't do this magical element to this baseball scene. And I was like, I wrote this scene with magic for baseball on purpose. I was like, I'm going to keep that in there.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Like they thought it might be similar to something else.
Yeah,
or
I
just
thought it was
have
like
notes, something else.
they just thought it was being a little extra or something like that. I don't know. I guess basically they made you rethink it, that sort of thing. But I was like, I kind of wrote this scene based because I wanted to do it. So I was like, I'm gonna keep it in there and stuff for certain things like
It's
that.
a very fun baseball scene. It's magical baseball. If you haven't read The Undertakers, you should read it for that scene too, because it is the cool factor is there. And so I'm glad that it was
Yes.
there because
Yes.
it was nice to see. It was fun. And sometimes you just want like, I want this cool thing in there. So I'm keeping it.
It's like I like the approach of some of these books is like if you're gonna write everything in there, try to put everything you want in there as possible.
Yes.
You might not get another chance. I mean, it's also your work too.
Right. Yeah. Your name is on the book. So have your cool magic baseball scene.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we're just about out of time. So any final notes that you want to leave the people with?
I don't think so. Yeah. It's check out the books. There's a lot of fun things and anything a lot of the conduct Undertakers, there's all the things that I thought were like really cool that ended up in there. Like they got secret codes, ciphers, tunnels, magical libraries, bookstores. I made a point there's a library and a bookstore in this book because I love them both. So little things like that are all in there because the things I enjoy.
And it is very fun, and definitely read the Conductors first and then read the Undertakers if you have not already.
Thank you so much to both of you. That's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you again to our guests and to all of you who tuned in this evening. We're greatly appreciative of everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads The Undertakers directly below the viewer screen. Remember, they will come with signed book plates. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.